Hello everyone, thank you for joining us here today. We are at a very critical moment in our country of Canada. I'm reminded of the words of a Canadian Prime Minister from right here in Prince Albert, John Diefenbaker, who said this, and I quote, "I have one love, Canada, one purpose, Canada's greatness, and one aim, Canadian unity from the Atlantic to the Pacific." Those words are as true today for each of us as they were for Prime Minister Diefenbaker some 70 years ago. Today, we as Canadians, and I would say as North Americans, are facing an unprecedented challenge, a challenge from policy direction coming from the White House. Challenges that are leading to uncertainty and frustration for many families on both sides of the border, for workers, for businesses, and families right here in our home province of Saskatchewan. The United States has been, and I believe will continue to be, Canada and Saskatchewan's largest trading partner, partly because of geography, yes, but partly because of decades of economic and trade integration. Today, in our province, we are impacted by the United States of America tariffs by some 6% of our Saskatchewan economy, which means 94% of the Saskatchewan economy continues with market-free trade, tariff-free access. The counter-tariffs that were introduced by our Canadian government the other day impact about 11% of Saskatchewan's imports from the United States of America, impacting about $1.6 billion of imports. And I would say that whether that be American tariffs or Canadian counter-tariffs, that we may see those unfortunately escalate in the days ahead. We need to have one goal with all of the very intentional actions that we take, and that goal has to be for both parties to return to the table and to provide incentive for that to happen, and ultimately come to a trade arrangement that is good for the entirety of North America. All of our efforts have to be headed in that direction. But when this uncertainty arises in this trading partnership, it is deeply concerning for us as governments, and I would say even more concerning for us as individuals and families across this nation. Let's remember that it was not Canada that got us into the situation that we now face. And I believe that the Canadian government has been negotiating in good faith on behalf of all provinces, including this province of Saskatchewan, and on behalf of all Canadians more broadly. Negotiations leading up to this past weekend were starting to point towards us coming to an agreement. And we were in favor of heading that direction, although it was not a perfect agreement and it did not return us to the tariff-free access that we had under the CUSMA trade arrangement over the last number of years. It did provide certainty for Saskatchewan and Canadian companies and ultimately for Saskatchewan and Canadian families. Among the late changes that occurred late last week, and there were many, but it was at those very late hours that the U.S. team wanted to impose restrictions on something that is completely within the Canadian purview and jurisdiction, and that was encroaching on our international trade agreements. And this is totally unacceptable from the perspective of Saskatchewan, and I think from the perspective more broadly of Canadians. Here in Saskatchewan, we have worked very hard, and we have invested over the last 2 decades to increase our exports to countries around the world, as well as to find additional and new trading partners in countries around the world. And I would say that those efforts are working in this province, and they're very evident in what you see happening in the Saskatchewan economy today. And that work is critical to the success of our Saskatchewan and our Canadian economy moving forward. Today, this province of 1.2 million people, Saskatchewan trades with over 160 countries around the world. We are one of the largest exporting per capita subnational regions, not just in Canada, but in North America. And at the same time, we have been able to attract unprecedented investment into our province, into the development of our natural resources and our agricultural sector, as well as manufacturing and many other areas. In fact, today we have over 60 projects that are moving forward with a total investment of over $65 billion in action today, and many more tens of billions of dollars that are being considered as we speak. We see new potash mines, uranium mines, copper mines, rare earth elements investments. We see helium investments, lithium investments, and certainly an expansion of the oil industry that is being made and will continue to be made in the years ahead. Right here in our province. Those investments will lead to even higher exports for our province and our nation in the years ahead, including higher exports to the United States of America. Having that expanded market access and that increased investment that we are able to attract in this province and this nation, it offers greater stability for our Saskatchewan economy, our Canadian economy, and offers greater stability for Saskatchewan families that live here. It helps keep our Saskatchewan economy strong and steady, and it helps keep our province strong and steady, even in the face of this current trade turmoil that we are faced with our largest trading partner, the United States of America. We currently find ourselves facing increased tariffs across this nation, and as I said earlier, unfortunately, likely more to come. The actions that are coming from the United States, they do not hit all provinces the same. Our economies are very different from coast to coast to coast, and that diversity of our economies and diversity of people really is our Canadian strength. Likewise, I would say the counter tariffs that were announced by the Canadian government, they also will not be felt equally across this very large nation. In Saskatchewan, that impact will have an effect of about 11% of the goods that come in from the United States, but as I say, potentially more to come. So we will be working very closely through our industry roundtables here in this province to work closely with impacted businesses in Saskatchewan to determine the impact of the tariffs as well as the countermeasures from our Canadian government. And I want to be clear, as a government of Saskatchewan, we are supportive of these very targeted countermeasures that are in place, but only when those tariffs are focused and targeted to have a minimal impact on Canadian industries and families and a larger impact on our trading partner that we want to bring back to the table. These were introduced and will become in action on September the 8th. And they will impact, we should have no illusions, these counter tariffs will also impact people on both sides of the 49th parallel. We have always said that American imposed tariffs will have an impact not only on Canadian industry but on American industry. The same can be said for counter tariffs. What we as a province cannot and will not support is any kind of export tariff on our natural resources or any of our resources that are being exported to the U.S. or through the U.S. to other areas of the world. What we have faced and what those very industries have faced over the course of the last decade or better are some very flawed policy discussions and flawed policy implementations in our nation for far too long. Let me start with the potential suggestion of an export tax on potash. Saskatchewan in the not too distant future will be providing half of the world's potash. That would be a tremendous economic hit to our province and to our nation. First, Canadians would lose jobs. Second, farmers on both sides of the borders would pay more for that crucial fertilizer. Third, the United States of America most assuredly would switch to buying potash from other nations around the world, nations like Belarus, for example. We would lose a long-term customer to some degree, and indirectly, I think it's fair to say, there are much closer nations that will not deal with a country like Belarus when it comes to potash procurement. This would be a tremendously flawed policy on behalf of Canadians. We today in the potash industry are using virtually all North American ports to ensure that we can get that product to the world. This again is due to a flawed policy in Canada when it comes to our port governance, in particular the structure of the board at the Port of Vancouver, which is not representative of the 3 prairie provinces that export the bulk of the product out the Port of Vancouver. We are restricted due to those policy decisions that have been made that are utilizing port capacity in Canada to export other products from other areas of the world and to import other products from other areas of the world, thereby restricting our ability to export more products like potash out the Port of Vancouver. We have asked for that structure to change, the board structure at the port to change, to prioritize the Canadian economy, to prioritize the prairie provincial economy so that we have true access to the world through an efficient port system and ultimately build that industry for years into the future. Similarly, we cannot in any way support the adding of export tariffs on a product like oil. Again, it would be an unsustainable hit to our Canadian economy and in particular our Saskatchewan and Alberta economy. Canadians would lose jobs immediately. We as a nation would lose investment immediately. And I would put forward that an export tariff on oil would have a far greater impact on those that are living in Eastern Canada than it would even on those that are directly working in the energy industry. 20 to 50% of Canadians' refined petroleum products, our diesel, our gasoline, is produced through products that are produced in Western Canada, travel through the United States of America back into Canada to be refined and utilized. An export tariff on that Canadian Western oil would most assuredly result in a much higher price on gasoline, largely in Eastern Canada. Again, this is only a function of a flawed policy discussion that we have had in this nation over the course of the last decade or better, where we see those all too often, those very same individuals that are promoting export tariffs on a product like oil 10 years ago were the very same individuals standing up and saying we should not build important energy security infrastructure like the Energy East pipeline. Flawed policy 10 years ago, flawed policy today. We should not make the same mistake twice. Our support for Canadian counter tariffs, we do support Canadian counter tariffs when they are focused, when they are targeted, and more importantly, they are in place for the short term, and they are making every effort to bring our American partners back to the table and for us to return to that negotiating table so that we can find an agreement and move forward. And I think this is a point that everybody can agree is the end goal of everything and should be the target of everything that we do. But in the meantime, given the increased tariffs that the United States of America has put on Canadian and Saskatchewan goods, given the counter tariffs that are in place, we need to protect ourselves. And I know there's been many that have been asking if Saskatchewan is going to make changes with respect to American alcohol that is being made available in this province. And our government has decided throughout this that we want to leave the choice with the people of Saskatchewan. That is a very important core value for this government, to allow Saskatchewan people to make their own choice. And we believe that that ability to not have government in your life to the degree possible is a very core value of the families that live here. And I would say that Saskatchewan people are choosing. American alcohol sales in our province are down 40%. And I think that that actually sends a much stronger message than any government-ordered ban that could be put in place. The sale of Saskatchewan-made products has increased at the very same time. So while we see Saskatchewan residents walking away from American products and choosing Canadian-made, of which we encourage them to do, if and when we take any measures in this province, the goal of those measures is, one, return to the table with deliberate and intentional measures and find our way to a negotiated trade agreement. But as I said, we do also need to defend ourselves. So on August 22nd, things changed in this province with respect to alcohol procurement, and in particular Saskatchewan alcohol being exported to the United States of America. There was a 50% tariff that was applied to Canadian alcohol exports into the US. And so on September the 8th, Saskatchewan will reciprocate that tariff on American alcohol that will come into our province. I believe it's important as well that all of the construction that we see happening in this province, whether it be public investment or private investment, that those construction projects are utilizing to every degree possible Canadian and Saskatchewan proponents to build our province. Procurement for government projects across Saskatchewan, our roads, our highways, our schools, our hospitals, of which the most significant investment is just across town here in Prince Albert, 94% of that procurement in public infrastructure today goes to Saskatchewan companies. 99% of that procurement goes to Canadian companies. In the private sector, let me point to the third largest infrastructure project in the nation of Canada today. That is the Bell Canada data center located outside of Regina. Bell Canada is 100% a Canadian company, and it is building the largest data center in Canada as we speak. There are thousands of individuals that are working on the construction of that project today. There are over 800 long-term careers in security, in logistics, in maintenance, in hospitality that are going to be a direct result of that investment in Saskatchewan. And we believe that that Bell Canada data center will be good for our province, providing those jobs for workers across Saskatchewan and providing that economic security for families. And we'll be announcing very shortly, in the next 24 hours or so, the guidelines that the government has been following and has established for any future data center projects and those investments that will come to our province. But I can tell you today that one of the highest priorities and requirements in the government of Saskatchewan, considering additional data center investment in this province, is that it is a Canadian proponent, like Bell Canada. As I said earlier, we have put ourselves in a very vulnerable position today, partly due to flawed policy that has blocked projects in this country that have often gone ahead in the United States of America. Projects like expansion to our port facilities that can ultimately provide the opportunity to expand our economy and attract investment in places like the potash industry. Partly due to flawed policy discussions around how we can create true energy security across Canada by important nation-building energy projects like the Energy East pipeline or something of that nature. In doing so, and by implementation of that flawed policy, we have given up some of our economic security. We certainly have given up some of our energy security, which is becoming evident today, and ultimately putting at risk our very sovereignty. We should not make that mistake or any of those mistakes again in the future. We need to do better. We need to do better as Canadians, building our domestic policy so that we can build our food security, continue to expand our energy security to other Canadians and to countries around the world, and ultimately continue to expand our economic security and our national sovereignty and the sovereignty that we contribute to the continent of North America. We are here as a government to support and defend Saskatchewan and Canadian businesses at every step. We are here to be very intentional and direct in our decisions, and at times that will involve reciprocal action. But we are very intentional in our goal, which is for our American counterparts and our Canadian government to return to that negotiating table so that we can find a path forward to a trade agreement that is going to benefit the North American economy and benefit families on both sides of the 49th parallel. We also want to ensure that workers continue to be supported during this very unstable and uncertain time. The federal government has announced support measures for workers and for businesses, and those supports, I would say, need to be set up, and we will continue to work with the federal government so that they can be delivered in such a way that actually supports and helps those families that are impacted by either the U.S. tariffs or our Canadian counter tariffs. So while we support these countermeasures, we also understand that they are going to harm businesses, workers, and families, not just in Canada, but also in the United States. It's not the course of action that we would have ever hoped for. It's not the course of action that we want to be on. But unfortunately, it is action that needs to be taken at this time. The best path forward for Canada and the United States of America, for Canadians and Americans, is for both of our economies to move forward with a free and fair trade agreement so that we can ensure that we have a sovereign continent. We will all have choices to make in the days and the months and hopefully not the years ahead. There is no roadmap for what we are currently facing in this nation or on this continent. But I would commit this government to this, that the Saskatchewan government will be listening to Saskatchewan business owners, to Saskatchewan workers, and most importantly to the families that live here. Listening, and we are going to act on your behalf to make the best decision that we can in what is a very uncertain and an unprecedented time. So I will close how I started with some words from the former Prime Minister from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, with a quote, and I quote, "One Canada, where Canadians control their own destiny." Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We do have some calling questions that are going to be happening as well, but I would bring yours prepared to answer your questions now.
Yes.
You talked a lot about unity and stuff like that, so can you just break down for me exactly how, have you gone through the counter tariffs, and how will the American tariffs on Canadians and the counter tariffs, how will that affect the average resident of Saskatchewan?
Cost of living will increase. We will all experience that. Whether it's the U.S. tariffs or counter tariffs, it is going to push the cost of living up. This is part of what I was speaking to as well with the flawed policy decisions that we've made as a nation, and I would say even flawed policy discussions, is we have not been paying attention to how do we create true economic and energy security across this nation and across the continent. We've had the discussion about Energy East and how that flawed policy decision was made where we didn't build that critical piece of infrastructure, and now 20 to 50% of the very gasoline that we buy as Canadians, largely in Eastern Canada, is produced in Western Canada, flows through the United States into the eastern part of our nation. Any flawed policy in the way of export tariffs is going to drastically increase that cost of gasoline, largely for those that are living in Eastern Canada. And so my point, let's not make the same mistake twice. We made it 10 years ago, let's not make it again today. Let's work together with a very intentional resolution to do what we can to bring the American administration back to that negotiating table, bring their Canadian government to that negotiating table, and find a path forward, because your question is an important one. How are most Canadians, and I would say Americans, going to notice what is happening in the policy and the trade discussion today? Their cost of living is going to increase. Their cost of doing business is going to increase, and life is going to become even more unaffordable in the short term for us as a continent. And I would say that does not position us well as North Americans as we look to be competitive in a global economy.
Mr. Premier, Canada's relationship with China apparently was brought up growing trade relationship with China was apparently brought up in the negotiations there. And apparently the U.S., it appears from the reporting, the U.S. is uneasy about Canada increased integration, I guess, with China. As someone there's offices there, you've traveled there, do you have any response to those kind of?
I don't think it really grew at all. It returned to where it was. We were exporting canola to China. In fact, it's not even back to where it was. We were exporting canola oil, canola seed, canola meal, pulses, pork to China. We still have tariffs in some of those places. Prior to years ago, we had no import limits on Chinese EVs, and now we do. And so I would say that our trade relationship with China is not even back to where it was half a dozen years ago. And we had to do some work. Myself, I was in there twice in the last year and a half, doing some work to have the canola tariffs lifted in that very country. So I don't think in any way that it has grown from what it historically has been. In fact, I'd say that it's not even back to where that is. So I don't agree with that assertion. However, I would say that the ability for Canada, and in particular this is important to a province like Saskatchewan that exports to over 160 countries around the world, we need to have the ability to have those international trade agreements as a sovereign nation. That's a non-starter. That's not to say that it isn't important for us to have a similar trade relation, non-tariff trade relationship with the United States of America, which would be the ultimate goal for us to return to. They are our largest trading partner. They traditionally have been our largest ally, but we're having a pretty tough conversation at the moment.
What's it going to take to get the two sides back to the table here for the trade talks? It seems like there's been heightened emotion with this particular trade negotiation, especially compared to, say, China earlier in the year.
I would say, what we've tried to take as a position throughout this is a very deliberate and pragmatic position, maybe removing some of the emotions and some of the comments, the daily comments from the conversation, and really getting down to what matters. And what does matter is that we're able to have that trade relationship with a low or no tariff, so that we can build not just our Canadian economy, but our North American economy from a food and energy security perspective, and then work together to ensure that we remain a sovereign continent. And I think that matters to each and every one of us. We've made some mistakes as Canadians. When you look at building our Canadian energy security in years gone by, we've made some mistakes in, I mentioned board governance and some of the challenges that we've had in exporting our potash to the world. We should not continue to make those mistakes because they happen to be the flavor of the day. We should make very pragmatic, logical, intentional decisions as we move forward, all with the goal at this point in time to bring the two parties back to the table and ultimately work towards a negotiated trade agreement that is beneficial for both countries. We've enjoyed this for years, and at times I would say that both as North Americans, both as Canadians and Americans, maybe we've taken it for granted. We're not taking it for granted now.
Prime Minister Carney is stressing the importance of a united Team Canada approach. Do you feel like that mindset has been met when it comes to his decisions thus far?
More than met by whether it be provincial premiers, although there's been differences in the approach. I think the goal is the same. And you could ask any premier across the nation, say, do you disagree with the effort to bring both parties back to the table and negotiate a trade agreement that is beneficial to both Canadians and Americans and ultimately building a stronger North American economy. I think each and every of the premiers, the 10 provincial and 3 territorial premiers, would agree with that. And I suspect that not only the federal governing party would agree with it, but all MPs serving in the House of Commons would agree with that as well. There's differences in opinion on how we get there, but we all need to be working towards finding our way to that conversation. That's what matters here.
When it comes to the demands that you've said are strongholds for Saskatchewan, things that you don't want to repeat from mistakes that we've seen in the past, do you think those requests will be heard by the federal government?
I've never heard the federal government raise anything in the way of export tariffs, so I have no reason to believe that they'd be moving forward with it. I have heard that through your media sources and others from others across Canada, and I just want to make sure that Canadians understand the full impacts of what they're asking for. The full impact of an export tariff on a product like oil is higher gasoline prices throughout the eastern part of our nation. That's not a positive impact for Canadians. It's not a positive impact for anyone in North America. And so we should be very careful with respect to policies that maybe make us feel good at the moment and policies that actually work towards getting back to that negotiating table and getting us to a strong trade agreement moving forward.
Ahead of these trade talks as a whole, you've said that Saskatchewan had special leverage when it came to even CUSMA talks. What happened to that leverage and how will it be used now?
Well, I think the approach of up until this point, saying today, since August 22nd, we're experiencing not only higher American tariffs, but also now counter tariffs have been imposed. And unfortunately, I think we're going to see that escalate on both sides in the days and weeks ahead. All of our approaches have not been successful thus far. Which means we need to continue to work together as provinces and territories and the federal government to continue to find our way. To answer the earlier question, I don't know what it is that would bring everyone back to the table tomorrow. However, we need to continue to have that focus and continue to take steps to ensure that at some point in time, hopefully sooner rather than later, that happens and we're able to come to a negotiated trade agreement that not only allows us to build our Canadian economy, and that is happening in great strides right here in Saskatchewan, nation leading, but also to build out the American economy and ultimately work together to build the entirety of the North American economic strength that we have. Where we are today is weakening all of those, and I would say when we look to our ability to compete in a globally competitive atmosphere, that this is not good for any of us.
Is there a possibility to maybe lean on some of the governors, particularly in the border states, who we're hearing a lot of talk about how nervous some of them are about what's going on between Canada and the U.S. trade?
There's, and I'll maybe ask maybe Minister Merritt or anyone else to speak about some of the outreach, and this is part of what Saskatchewan has to offer through various conferences that happen at the state level. But there is all opportunities, I think, for each of us as Canadian leaders at whatever level we might be, to reach out and to have conversations with state level representatives throughout the United States, in particular in those states where we trade, and that's different province by province, but also at the Senate, congressional leaders, as well as governors. And we've been talking at many levels throughout the last number of decades, but in particular the last number of months. But Dave, we were talking a little bit earlier about a conference that's coming up. You want to speak to that?
Thanks, Premier. Yeah, there's a Midwest Legislative Congress convention or conference starting this weekend in Minneapolis, and there's 6 of us that are going down to that. I was just in Madison, Wisconsin here in July, talking to my state counterparts. There was 15 state ag commissioners there at that one, and we talked very openly about the trade agreement, and every one of them was very supportive of USMCA, or CUSMA as we call it, and to continue on that path. So I would say that from an agriculture perspective, a lot of the states are on side, and we do, in the ag side, we deal with 27 different states in the United States.
Just a quick agriculture-related question from either the Premier or the Minister. Can we just get the government's, what's the government's standing policy right now on supply management?
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, I mean, the supply management is legislated by the federal government, and that's where it's at. And we had a good discussion at the FPT table about the supply management process. We have supply management here in the province of Saskatchewan, both from a dairy side and obviously a poultry side. And we see that increasing. We look at that as even an opportunity to grow, and I'll tell you why. It's because of the vastness of our area. And the biggest thing that I've heard, even when I was down in Madison, Wisconsin, when we talked about that, is what they like about what we have up here is we're disease-free, and the vastness of where our industry is growing and where it is it's separated by distance, and they like that. So we see that as an opportunity to grow.
So supportive, fair to say?
Well, it's already there. Yeah, it's there. Yeah. So why would we not? It's just it's part of the process. It's part of the agriculture, and it's mandated. It's in legislation federally.
Okay, I just wanted to find out, you did mention about oil and potash not being on the table right now, but what would it take for using that as leverage in the future if it comes to that?
It's not possible.
Why?
Why would you put Canadians out of work with a flawed policy? That would be my question. Why would Canadians would immediately lose their job? We would immediately lose market share. Immediately, we would lose those trade relations moving forward. And we would lose potential investment that's coming into our natural resource sector, the very sector that is driving the economic growth of our nation as we speak. It would be a flawed policy that would build on the flawed policy that this nation had enacted over the course of the last decade, which is not providing us with, not putting us in an energy secure position today.
Mr. Premier, can I ask you about, you were talking about U.S. alcohol staying on shelves in Saskatchewan, but that there would be taxes, perhaps? Can you
A reciprocal tariff.
Reciprocal tariff for
On
Saskatchewan?
August the 22nd, the United States of America put a 50% tariff on Canadian and Saskatchewan alcohol that is exported to the United States. And what we have chosen to do is to reciprocate that tariff on U.S. alcohol that would be coming into Canada. It'll be good for our Saskatchewan producers with domestic and local sales. But we would also say that, at the very core of this government's belief is that people have the power to choose, and we encourage them to do so. And they are doing so, as we've seen U.S. alcohol sales in Saskatchewan drop by some 40%. And we encourage them to continue to make the choices that are right for their family. Government does not need to mandate, to legislate all of the decisions that families make across this province, and I dare say across this nation. We believe people have the power to choose. It's at the very core of our discussions as a government. We believe it's at the core of families' beliefs as well.
Can you elaborate how much that tax is going to be, and will it apply to everything across the board coming from the U.S.?
American imports, yeah, would be 50%, a 50% increase.
50?
50.
Premier,
Which mirrors the reciprocal nature of the U.S. tariff. It's not new, it's just reciprocating.
I have Nick Murray from the Canadian Press on the line. Nick, go ahead.
Hi, thank you guys. First off, Premier, thank you to your staff for arranging for me to hop on this. I really do appreciate your effort. You've been pretty clear that obviously an export tax on Saskatchewan's natural resources is a non-starter. But I'm wondering, do you see any way that perhaps maybe hasn't been discussed in the national discourse to leverage Saskatchewan's natural resources, particularly potash, to put any type of pressure on the U.S. industry?
Access to additional production. We have the largest potash mine in the world that's being built as we speak, come into production in the very near future. We have two uranium mines that have all of their provincial and federal approvals are moving forward. A third that has the provincial. I suspect very shortly we'll have their federal approvals. We will have additional uranium available and possibly to make available to a strong trading partner like the United States of America should we be able to get to a trade agreement. So I think the same can be said for oil. We have a target in this province to increase our oil production to 600,000 barrels, and I truly believe we can go beyond that. But to provide some of that additional product to what has traditionally been an allied nation like the United States of America. And I say that, and notwithstanding the challenging trade discussions that we find ourselves in today, and heated at times.
Just as a quick follow-up, in the last federal election, the Green Party had a platform proposal to create a national strategic reserve of potash. And the way that would fund that was they proposed to create bonds that Canadians could buy into with a guaranteed 5% return in order to create this thing. Do you think that's a good idea? And have you heard about it during the election campaign? Have you given much thought? Just kind of curious on your thoughts.
Well, we have a national potash reserve, and it's sitting under our feet here in this province. As I say, through attracting investment in the development of the industry in Saskatchewan, we will be providing about half of global supply annually of potash to our allied nations around the world. So we have that strategic reserve here today. We should not make any flawed policy decisions. In fact, we should improve on previous policy decisions so that we can provide that product to other nations, other allied nations around the world through efficient port governance. And I spoke to that earlier. If the federal government wants to buy some of that potash, I'm sure I can put them in touch with the industries that are producing it, and I'm sure they'd be more than willing to sell them some of that for any type of a strategic reserve. The same goes for oil or any other product should they want to build that. We certainly in this province can put them in touch with the appropriate folks that can provide any of those critical minerals or natural resources.
Thank you, Mayor.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
You quoted Diefenbaker today. Diefenbaker talked about putting Canada first and protecting Canada's economic independence. In this situation we are in right now, what does putting Canada first actually require Saskatchewan to do differently when it comes to buying Canadian, interprovincial trade, and reliance on the U.S. market?
So I agree with all of that. However, we produce in this nation and in particular in this province more than we could ever buy ourselves. So we are an exporting province by our very nature. We are an exporting country by our very nature. That's why we're having this discussion with the United States of America. They're our largest trading partner. We trade with the United States larger than anyone else, but we trade with many countries around the world. This province, 160 of them. There is only about 190 or 195 countries. So we are very, very exposed to those global relationships simply because we produce so much more than we could ever utilize ourselves as a province, as provincial citizens, or as Canadians as well. That's why we need to have these global relationships and these trade arrangements, and that's why it's so sensitive going through this discussion with the United States of America. I would say that what putting Canada first looks like is everything that we do, every day, each of us, in our work, in our personal lives, whatever that is to get us back to the negotiating table, to get the relevant parties back to the negotiating table and find our way to some trade certainty with our largest trading partner. That, to me, is what putting Canada first looks like. We need to set aside all too often what the emotion of the day is, or answering what the latest rhetoric that is coming out of the White House is, and we need to focus solely on how we get to that trade certainty with our largest trading partner, and ultimately how we are getting to that trade certainty around the world. If we only produced enough for ourselves and we were an importing nation, it would be a different conversation. That is not what we do in Canada. We generate wealth by producing stuff, by building stuff, by growing things, and selling it to our global citizens.